for all of New Zealanders in a sustainable way going forward. Thank you very much.
Michael Woodhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's often said that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, and I must say the Labour Party has flattered the government with its imitation on what it says is now important to grow the New Zealand economy. After 2.5 years of railing against government policy, and they've had something of a road to Damascus experience. Remember in the 2009 budget when Messrs Cunliffe and Gough both decried the budget because it was pandering to the ratings agencies, because they didn't think that maintaining New Zealand's credit rating was important. Well, they're not saying that now, Mr. Speaker, and I think that there's some mimicry in their campaigning on a fairer tax system, the controlling of government expenditure and reducing debt. Now, I'll come back to Labour's policies and the merits of some of their policies soon, but I do want to touch on some of the highlights of National's 2011 budget, because it's quite remarkable that in an election year, certainly to my friends on the other side, that the government would campaign on a zero budget. But what's less remarkable is the fact that there has been such little negative feedback from members of the public on this, because fundamentally they understand the need to have spending disciplines given the very challenging economic conditions we face and the need to rebuild Canterbury after the earthquakes. And that spending discipline will ensure that the country returns to meaningful surplus by 2013-14. And notwithstanding, well, we'll come to a comparison with Labour's plan in a minute, but notwithstanding that zero budget, I'm particularly pleased with a couple of the spending initiatives and budget initiatives where we've managed to maintain what, by the standards of this budget, has been an extremely generous increase. And the first one is in vote health, which reflects, I think, the importance the government and the public place on this important area of spending. Because not only that, but the messages of productivity are certainly getting through to those working in the health sector, and there have been excellent improvements in throughput and reductions in waiting times. And it's worth comparing that response to other jurisdictions around the world and what they're doing in their health budget, because in Britain they are planning 50,000 staff reductions in the NHS. In Ireland they're slashing 5% off their health budget. The Italians are planning health cuts of between 2.5 billion and 5 billion euros over the next couple of years. And in Ontario and Canada, they're reporting 2,500 nurses are losing their jobs in the next couple of years. So I'm very proud of the fact that we have maintained spending in Vote Health. But the other area in the budget that I think is very good is in Vote ACC, and that's for a couple of reasons. Obviously, Vote ACC funds the non-earner account, but the scheme generally is such an important part of the Crown accounts, because even small movements in rehabilitation performance can have quite dramatic impacts on the government's balance sheets. And one of the most disappointing aspects of Labour after 2.5 years in opposition is that they simply cannot bring themselves to apologise for the mess that they left ACC in. And not only that, but they are now accusing the government of somehow cooking the books to create a crisis. Well, I think that insults the hard-working members of ACC, their auditors, their actuaries and the Office of the Auditor-General. And it wasn't Nick Smith's signature on the 2008 ACC financial report, which oversaw a $2.4 billion deficit. And it wasn't Nick Smith that presided over half of the following year when National came to power and 5 minutes later ACC had their hands out for $305 million in the non-earner account because the Labour cabinet brushed that crisis under the carpet in breach of the Public Finance Act. And it's certainly not the Labour Party who can take the credit for the $500 million of cash that this government is putting back in the pockets of hard-working New Zealanders thanks to the turnaround efforts of ACC. But it is worth reflecting on the comments made by members on the other side of the House about the health of the economy that they left office with, and an impression that everything was well in the economy at the end of 2008. Because here's what Labour left behind. Dramatically, well, it's worth repeating them because they are very important context to this budget, Mr. Speaker. Dramatically falling economic growth, a country in recession 9 months earlier than the rest of the world, a rising current account deficit, annual productivity growth in the 9 years of Labour of just 1.1%, sharply rising Crown debt, business-based lending rates that were through the roof, an economy on negative credit watch, and here's the kicker, 10 years of projected deficits. And so far, Labor's plan for the economy is to take $800 million out of the pockets of hard-working farmers and pay it to tax accountants in the form of research and development tax credits. It doesn't work, it didn't work then, it won't work in the future. To reintroduce a punitive top tax rate of 39 cents in the dollar, completely undoing the good work that this government has done after the recommendations of the tax working group that said that we had gone from the least distortionary tax framework in the OECD to the most distortionary. To remove GST from fruit and vegetables, leaving people probably a maximum of about $1 a week better off. And I was absolutely amazed at the audacity of the member Leanne Dalziel, criticising the government for an apparent turnaround of GST, which I certainly don't agree with, when her member's party spent $30,000 of taxpayers' money jumping on a bus that said axe the tax, but they're not prepared to campaign on axing the tax. They talk big, but they're not prepared to go out and say that they would want to take the money that was put in the pockets of low and middle income New Zealanders to return GST to 12.5%. Lots of noise, Mr Speaker, but no action. And it's certainly well known that the Labor Party wants to return to what they call a fairer tax system, and that higher income earners need to pay more. Mr Goff talks about paying their fair share. But I questioned the Minister of Finance a couple of weeks ago about the fairness of our tax system, and the answer revealed some interesting facts. That when the redistributive policies of working for families and accommodation supplements taken into account, 44% of New Zealand households, the lowest income New Zealand households, pay no tax. In fact, they are net tax recipients. But 17% of the highest income households, after redistribution, pay net 97% of New Zealand's tax base. And Mr English said in answer to that question, the system is highly redistributive and we believe that that is fair. Well, I agree with him, but I don't believe that continuing to punish hard-working and high-income New Zealanders more than the 97% that's being taken out of the pockets of 17% of households is fair at all, Mr Speaker. So we've got a Labor Party that talks about the policies of fairer tax and spending control and debt reduction, but what it delivers is more punitive income and capital gains taxes, more government spending, higher debt. That's right, actually billions of dollars of extra debt in the first couple of years on their numbers. Even if the capital gains tax policy is as effective as they claim it will be, it requires them to borrow to fund the spending policies that will kick in straight away, because the capital gains tax will take several years to take effect, if at all. And they talk about spending control, but they can't bring themselves to deliver it. Mr Robertson is talking about big increases in health, and Ms Moroney wants to spend another $500 million on ECE. It will go on and on. And let's add another $500 million thanks to Ms Dyson. But Mr Cunliffe, of course, wants to borrow in the name of the taxpayer on a financial crapshoot that would have investment in equity markets around the world through the government superannuation fund, more debt on a financial crapshoot. Well, if he was really that good at picking the markets, Mr Speaker, he would have been telling this House about what was going to happen. In fact, 3 years ago, he'd have been strolling down the corridor to Mr Cullen's office and saying, you know what, I think these equity markets are going to tank. Government super fund and ACC should put their money into fixed interest. Well, he didn't do that, and he's no better at picking the markets now than he was then. It would be a complete financial crapshoot, Mr Speaker. And even with a capital gains tax, the distortionary effect on the capital markets would be huge, because many of our largest companies that are listed on the stock exchange fund their capital growth through tax-paid retained earnings. And the Labor Party, were they in government, would tax capital gains twice. Well, it's worth talking about, isn't it? Because we've talked about spending constraint. We've had 3 months of talking about a zero budget, which is very prudent in the circumstances, will return this country to surplus within 2 or 3 years, and it will leave our debt at below 30% and then dropping to zero by 2024. And I challenge the Labor Party Oh, they're all wrong. OK, well, I challenge the Labor Party to go out onto the hustings and put their numbers against ours, and we'll see whose party is believed.
Brendan Burns.
The member opposite.